So next up, we're going to be looking at viewing tips. Now, there's plenty of things to look at, focus on, factor in when you're maybe looking at a potential property for the first time. And it can get overwhelming when you first go to have a look at a property. Your eyes and your memory can be kind of all over the place. So what we're going to try and cover in this video is really looking at some key things to maybe look out for, and just some best practices really in terms of how to maybe conduct your viewings and really what to kind of focus on or prioritize when you're at the property for the first or maybe the second or even the third time. So when it comes to viewings, the very first time you're going to be looking at this is where the fun starts. It should be an exciting time. It should be a good time to kind of go around, have a look at the range of properties available out there, and really find that perfect kind of next property for your portfolio. But when it comes to the first viewing, don't kind of overdo it. You don't have to get everything kind of done on one viewing. It's absolutely normal to do multiple viewings on a potential property. So the first viewing, I'd probably say, is really just to focus on trying to build that rapport with the agent, especially if you're looking at multiple properties with them and you're relying on them to provide you opportunities, or provide that rapport or build that rapport, with the homeowner. If you're doing a viewing and it's the homeowner that's showing you around the property, it's absolutely critical to kind of get them on side. Now, it sounds very basic or even obvious to some, but for others, when it comes to kind of building that rapport, if you kind of don't get on with the seller, or they really kind of dislike you for any particular reason, and that's not going to help you when it comes to physically kind of purchasing the property or going through that negotiation phase. And because there's so many variables that can come up in a property purchase after your negotiation and your offer phase, when it goes through the legals, you really want to have a good, strong rapport with that seller from day one. So if you can put some effort into making sure that you kind of spark that conversation, spark that kind of relationship on that first viewing, that's going to add way more value for you than just going around with a kind of a microscope and a big notebook and a big video camera trying to kind of take everything in on that property. So it's very important to get those kind of initial basics kind of dialed in. Now, on the first viewing, once you've built that rapport, it's a fantastic starting place for your second viewing when you want to look at the property in a much more detailed light. Now, people expect you to do second viewing, so it's not a problem at all arranging a second viewing on a potential property. It's also a great opportunity then to take around maybe a build team or a refurbishment team if you are looking at doing some refurbishment works on the property. If you take them around to every single first viewing you do, you're very possibly wasting yours and their time. Whereas if you have looked at a property, you like it, it stands out to you for the right reasons, and you do want to do a second viewing, that's a perfect opportunity to take your refurbishment team with you. Also, things to kind of consider when you're looking at a property for your second time, you can really pick up more nuanced elements of that property, because you can start to really look and assess the property in a slightly different light. You can spend a bit more time focusing on things like, do the doors shut properly? And you don't have to go around every single door. You can if you want to, but just simply testing a few of the doors when you're going in and out of rooms. Same with the windows. Do the windows shut properly? Because if they don't, then it might be indicative of other maintenance issues in the property. It's just maybe not been looked after or maintained or done to the right standard. It might be isolated. It might just be one window that needs fixing, but at least you then know that you might need some budget, some costs that are going to come up during your ownership of that property that need to be sorted before maybe a tenant moves in. Other things to consider is just quite basic elements really when you maybe know about it or you factor it into your daily kind of routine, but looking at things like plug sockets, how many plug sockets are in a given room. We've viewed properties before where you go into kind of the main bedroom and there's one double plug socket or even one single plug socket hidden away in a very obscure part of the room. It's like, well, that's not going to be great for a tenant when they move in if they've got multiple items they want to kind of plug into a room. So we would always prefer to have 2 double plug sockets in every room kind of where possible, or every main room, bedrooms, lounge, dining room, for example. Looking out for these basic things just give you a bit of an insight into what the condition maybe of the electrics is. If there's only one single plug socket in a room, probably not been upgraded for a while, because it's very rare that you'd have that put in a more modern type property. Or a more recent type refurbishment. So there's all these variables that are worth considering that are much easier to do on a secondary viewing. Now, don't worry, you don't have to be a structural surveyor, you don't have to be skilled at trades to kind of go out and assess these. It's more about just kind of spotting things that you would like if if you were living there as a tenant, and then making a list and then really kind of speaking and liaising with a refurbishment team on that if there's any issues, or if it's a brand new build, speaking to your builder or your developer about those elements to see if they can kind of factor in any kind of snagging issues or any improvements to the property before it's signed off or before the purchase. So you don't need to overthink it, you don't need to kind of get too overwhelmed with it. It's just about trying to understand and look at maybe other elements when you're doing your viewing for your second time. Now there are a couple of additional tips that we can kind of give you some guidance on or some insight on if you are viewing properties for the first time. If you're brand new to property, these might be new to you. If you're experienced in property, these might sound kind of very basic, but they do absolutely help when you're looking at them, when you're looking at properties for the first time. So when it comes to viewing, we would usually say to the agent or the seller of the property what your buying position is. It just gives them confidence. So if you're buying the property with cash and you've got the money ready to go, absolutely shout about that. There's no downside to that I can see in terms of that conversation. It gives you a very strong position when you're speaking to those sellers or those agents about your potential buying position. Also, what your time frame is. So do you have another property you need to sell? Do you have solicitors kind of ready to go? Are you looking to buy a property within the next 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years, whatever time frame you're looking at? Be open with that. Again, that can really strengthen your potential buying position on that property. I'd also suggest to really, when you're speaking to the agents, let them know about all the property opportunities you're viewing. So if you've got a second viewing on a property, and it's a similar location, similar property type, maybe similar price range, don't be shy about kind of telling them about that. That can help that conversation, because it might be that the seller of the property you're viewing there and then might be a little bit more motivated to sell, might be a bit more keen on accepting an offer. And if they're aware that you're viewing other properties, maybe they might kind of open up a little bit more, either the individual that's selling the property or the agent that's selling the property, about what the scope is for a potential price on that property. And it's not any kind of hard negotiation or tactics or anything like that. It's just simply about giving them awareness and insight into other things that you might be kind of seeing, because that might kind of help that conversation around price for you on the particular property you're viewing there and then. One caveat I would add to that is, if you can, don't try and get into a negotiation on the property at the location. It weakens very often for most people their position, because it can be quite an emotional thing. You don't have much time to think or to use data as a starting point for your offer. It's usually a situation where you then get into a weakened position if you're trying to negotiate or discuss price of a property there and then. Now, for some serious negotiators, there are some techniques that they can use that can really add value in that scenario. But for the majority of us, it's quite a tricky scenario to try and kind of negotiate either with a seller or an agent at that point in time. I'd always suggest to kind of refer back and say, look, I'm maybe possibly interested, but I need to either check with a partner, or I need to just recheck the figures and see what position we might be able to offer on for the property. That puts you in a much stronger position. You're then able to come to the table later on in the conversations or the negotiations about price with more data at your fingertips. You'll be able to check sold comparisons, you'll be able to check local properties that are on the market as competing properties, and it's a much simpler and easier conversation, and you can do it in your own time and in your own kind of preferred environment, if it were. So it's great to let the seller and the agent know if you are viewing other properties, and kind of discuss what the local market is kind of doing or the prices of properties, but try not to get into a negotiation specifically on that property at that moment in time. Hope that helps.